So let's talk about HBS. What does HBS want to know? Well, here's their question. It's really straightforward. As we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy? Now, when most people look at this question, they first think that it's a non-question. They think, oh, there is no prompt. There is no question here. But that's a mistake because, in fact, think about Harvard's mission, right? So does anyone know what Harvard's mission is? Type it in the chat box if you know what Harvard's mission is. Okay, Christine knows. Maybe that was Googled. Okay, so here it is. The mission of Harvard Business School is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. This is a really concrete mission that they have. They're not out to teach business. They're not out to help people make more money. They're out to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. So if you're talking to a leader, I think the most important question you can ask that person is, what do you want me to know about you? I actually think this is the most important question in the entire application process. Harvard wants to know what it is that you want them to know. It's not the absence of a question. It's a very specific question. What is it that you want them to know about you? You're given free license to say whatever is meaningful, interesting, and important to you about yourself. So you all probably know that this is what Harvard evaluates. They have these 3 criteria that they're looking for in every applicant: engaged community citizenship, a habit of leadership, and analytical aptitude and appetite. This is in their stated evaluation criteria. So most of you will be showing analytical aptitude and appetite through your grades, through your scores, possibly through your work experience, maybe even through your recommendations, and very definitely in some ways through your resume. So this one is almost certainly covered. Likewise with a habit of leadership. If you're doing your resume right, your resume really should show all the ways in which you've been a leader so far in your community and in your career. And then again, your recommendations should further corroborate that. Your recommender should be speaking to your leadership qualities. So for most people, the essays include an element of engaged community citizenship. This is the hardest to quantify, and it's the hardest to bulletize. It's the hardest to turn into a bullet. So if I look across, so one of the things I did to prepare for this session, which was so much fun, is I went through all of our clients' essays who successfully got into Harvard. So I spent the last 48 hours just rereading amazing Harvard essays. And one of the things that I can definitely say that most of our client essays have in common is that they are covering in some way this candidate's penchant for being an engaged citizen of the communities that they've been a part of. But keep this in mind. Your resume is going to do the heavy lifting in conveying your accomplishments. At least it should. So the question really is, what else do you want them to know? The essay really isn't about how great you are or how accomplished you are or what you've achieved in your life. It's about the intangibles. It's about your values and it's about your character. So, this is the fundamental question that Harvard is asking. How do you want to be known? That's the question. All right. So to help you think about how to approach this question for yourself, I'm going to actually walk you through the process that we use with our clients. And I think that will be illuminating for you as you seek to approach these essays, whether you're doing it on your own or in whatever capacity. So we start with a process of deep self-reflection. This is really essential because all communication rests on intimate self-knowledge. We then create a 15-page PowerPoint or more sometimes that summarizes your entire life story, everything that's amazing and interesting and unique about you. Then we go into storyboarding. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we shape the essay through really an unlimited number of iterations. And then finally, the finished product is essays that really make you proud and inspire you. This is our goal. I'm going to say more about that as well. So let me talk you through these 3 steps so that you can get a deeper sense of what I'm talking about. So for self-reflection, we have a structured process that we take our clients through. But here's the bottom line. Self-reflection in MBA applications is mostly about values. It's essentially about what you stand for. Those are really the kinds of questions that you need to be asking yourself as you approach all of your MBA essays, but especially the Harvard essay. And so here's what Harvard stands for. This is an extension of their mission. So just take a moment and read this. I've taken it upon myself to bold and make red the important terms on this page. So you see that all of these kind of pertain to a kind of citizenship. It's just basically being a good person, being someone who cares about other people, who treats people with respect, who's accountable, has integrity, honesty, and authenticity. So I'm sure that if all of you look in your lives, you'll see the places where you resonate with these values, where you connect at some way with these values and how they are demonstrated in your life. So again, poking around this concept is a good place to start if you're stuck for where to begin. Now, your voice, you've probably heard this, and if you've been in any of my sessions, you've even heard me say it, that your voice is critically important to your success in your MBA applications. And at some level, this is a gross oversimplification, what I'm about to say, but it's still accurate. That voice, if we think about what that translates to, how do you find your voice? What is your voice? What defines your voice? It's really choice. It's very convenient that these words rhyme because they really go together. When I think about helping my clients find their voice, it's about helping them identify the key choices that have really led to their life turning out as it is and that have developed them into the people that they are. So here's the thing about the human experience. We have no choice about choice. Basically, the human condition is to constantly and unendingly be forced to make choices, moment by moment by moment. This is what it means to be alive. You had to make a choice about whether to come into this session today. You're making a choice right now about whether you pay attention or whether you click into something else. You're making a choice about how to interpret the words I'm saying. So at every moment, we are making choices. This is what it means to be human. And so to drill down into the DNA of your unique character, it's really all about the choices. When you're confronted with a choice, which option do you choose? So this is an area to explore as you're thinking about getting into your essays, is what are some of the most important choices that I've made so far? And why did I make them? How did I make them? And what were the consequences? Where did they lead me? That's like the very light sort of 101 dummies version of self-reflection. But if you start there, you're already doing a really, really, really great, you're doing a great thing for your progress. So really get to know your choices. All right, now the next step is storyboarding. And this has to do with taking all of the material, all of the amazing things about your life, and boiling them down into the few components that you're going to put together to answer this question. And so the first thing you have to keep in mind when you're approaching the Harvard question, and really any question, is that you need to answer the question. You need to answer it directly. Harvard is asking, what more would you like us to know? So you're going to have to tell them, here's what I'd like you to know. You don't have to have that sentence in there, and it certainly doesn't have to be the opening sentence, but it is effectively the question that you're answering, is what you want them to know. So start from that place. What do you actually want them to know? And then here's some instructions from the Harvard application. Just answer the question in clear language that those of us who don't know your world can understand. Easy to say, hard to do. This is really important advice. So here's our approach. Once we've helped our clients home in on their values, and select their very most important stories. And there's a lot in these 2 steps. These 2 steps take a ton of work and a ton of thought. But after we've done all of that, then we storyboard the essay. We have you choose a place to start. So it's really useful if you can choose an opening line. I'm going to show you a couple of opening lines in a minute, but it's really great to have an opening line. Then you want to get inspired. You want to be in the mindset of upliftment and inspiration before you sit down to write. That will ensure that what comes out will actually resonate with your best self and not, the you who woke up on the wrong side of the bed and didn't drink your coffee, right? So be sure that you're caffeinated. If you drink caffeine, be sure that you ate and slept well, be inspired, and then sit down and see what comes out. And then you have to rewrite it, right? So good writing, this is a quote I meant to put in here. Good writing is essentially rewriting. This is a quote from a famous author named Roald Dahl, and it's really, really true. So here's what storyboarding looks like. Instead of outlining where you're thinking of it in terms of like point 1 and then sub point A, B, C, and then sub point 1, 2, 3, you're thinking about it in terms of scenes. So we think about our clients' essays more like movies. And this is both because of my own training in screenwriting, but also because it leads to a much more dynamic version of your story. And it gives you very useful buffers to traverse the telling of the story instead of something so structured as an outline. So think about it in terms of like what comes first in the movie, and then what comes next, and then what comes after that. And then make sure that you have a good first line. So these are actually actual first lines from actual winning Harvard essays. And what you'll notice about these is that they're very workmanlike. They're very direct. You just get right into the story. You just say what happened, say what was happening, sum it up, get right to it. Each one of these is interesting. It grabs you. It makes you want to keep going. And that's because each of these is using the rules of narrative to bring you into the story. There's some rules to how you think about your first sentence. It doesn't have to be flowery. It doesn't have to be an elaborate scene. It's almost certainly better if it's not dialogue or a quotation. That can sometimes work, but it's really rare. So you just want to get right into the story and then just let the story carry you as you're writing it. This is my advice. So that's the storyboarding process. And then we get into story shaping. And this is a huge labor of love. It's a huge labor of love. It continues to deepen the discovery process. So most of our clients are still discovering the story while they're in the process of telling it. And their understanding of their values and exactly how they want to communicate them is getting clarified with each passing draft. So that's why we call it story shaping. So here's another piece of advice from Harvard. So we already talked about this one. Now let's talk about this. Don't overthink, overcraft, and overwrite. This is really important advice because Harvard, as you know, is based on the case method. So they're evaluating your communication skills in this essay. They're not looking for great writing. Shocker. They don't care how well you can write prose. Use of adjectives, flowery prose isn't really appropriate here. They just want to see how you make a point, how you communicate. And so for the most part, your essay should actually read more like you talk than how you might write. So this is a sacred mandate at Career Protocol. We're famous for doing barely any line editing of our clients' drafts. We do very little redlining because we really want to preserve your natural cadence of communication and your voice. So we take this, this is quite sacred. And so I'm going to show you, so this is the juicy part right here. So I'm going to show you, so this is a selection of recent clients who successfully gained admission to Harvard. You can kind of just take a moment and take a look at this page. I'm sure a million questions are already popping into your head and you kind of are looking at the heat map. Which of these people is most interesting to you? Okay, you can see kind of the synopsis of their story on the right side. So the drafting process is really subjective. So here's the number of drafts that it took each of these people to arrive at the finished version. And of course, our process includes unlimited drafts. So if it takes you 2, great. If it takes you 22, great. We go until we're both fully inspired and satisfied with the end result. So I want to point to a couple of things on this page. The first is that there's no right number of drafts. Everybody needs a different number of iterations. In some cases, for some people, the reason it took them so long is because they were a perfectionist and they were picking at things that maybe they should have let go of. In some cases, it's because we totally changed gears in the middle. We threw away one entire essay that we'd spent weeks on and started over. And so we ended up in this situation where we had 2 complete essays by the time it was ready to go, and we had to choose which one to submit. And then in other cases, the story was just continuing to evolve. So we had to follow that inspiration and allow the story to go where it was going to go. So there's nothing better or worse about taking more or fewer drafts. It really depends on you and exactly how much time and space your story needs to really achieve its potential. So for those of you who plan to go through this process on your own, really give yourself plenty of time to revisit your drafts and shape them as you go. Now I'm going to talk about word count. This is one of my favorite subjects. So everybody take a guess. Type in the chat box. What do you think is the longest? What's the range? Let me have you guess. What's the range of word count that my clients have had in their essays? So I want you to put a range. What do you think is the shortest and what do you think is the longest? And keep in mind that there's no limit on word count, right? So 300 is definitely too low for the upper bound. It's definitely longer than that. Okay, good. Okay, these are all really good guesses. Most of you are super duper way off, not even in the ballpark. So I think this next piece of information is going to shock you all. I'm really excited to see. I wish I could see all your faces when I reveal this. Okay, so this is the word count. And remember, all these people got in. So these are the word count essays of past clients who applied and successfully got in to Harvard. So if you read any advice about the Harvard essay, you're going to find almost everyone says 1,000 words tops, or 800 words tops, or 1,200 words tops, or something like that. And let me say a little more about this page. So first of all, the people at the top, so the shortest versions, were actually earlier than the others. So these are all people answering the same question. What more do you want us to know? And they've been asking that question almost nonstop for 7 years now. They had 1 year where they switched to a different question, and I'm not including that in here. Okay, so this is just people answering that question. And it's not everybody even in that window of time. This is just the last few years. But those shorter ones were earlier. So when I was frankly less experienced and thought I needed to get my clients down to a shorter essay. So there's 2 things that explain the shorter versions. Number 1, I was less experienced and had less confidence in helping the client really, really discover their story. The other thing that most of the people at the top have in common, the first person is the exception, but the rest of the people that are in the sub 1,000 range, their essays were shorter because they had a much simpler and more straightforward story to tell. In fact, the people at the bottom of this page, whose essays went up into the 2,000 range, had the most amazing, fascinating, riveting stories I have ever come across. And in fact, that 2,700 word essay felt like about 800 because it was so action-packed and interesting. So what the takeaway for all of you on this page is that the story has its own cadence and its own pace. It takes place in its own time. The number of words that it has is completely irrelevant. You want to tell the story in the appropriate amount of space that allows you to fully show the admissions committee your best self. Because ultimately, it's not your essays that get you in. It's not your GMAT. It's not even your resume. It's who you are. It's who you are that gets you into business school and especially into Harvard. Their mission is to educate leaders who make a difference and who exhibit certain values. That's not about what you've achieved. It's about who you are. So your job is to show your best self in the application. And everyone has a unique and distinct story to tell. So your job is to find yours. And in some cases, for some of you, that's a long story. And so you don't want to force yourself to tell it in a shorter amount of space. So if I had tried to cram some of these people into 800-word essays, we would have had to do all kinds of editing. We would have had to betray this advice. We would have had to overthink it, overcraft it, and overwrite it. So when Harvard says this, they really, really mean it. Even if your essay is a little bit long, they would rather hear the raw, authentic version of who you are in your own words as you want to tell that story than have you try to fit into some norm. Okay. So length of essay is totally irrelevant. You want to tell the story in as much time as it takes to really do it justice. And for most of you, that is somewhere in the 12 to 1400 range, but not all of you. Some of you are going to take a lot more than that. So here's some advice from an actual client who successfully got into Harvard. I think for HBS, I always considered it a long shot, so I wasn't afraid to present what I felt was my true story. I think it's more an opportunity to reflect on what the most important part of your story is. I wanted to be honest and true to myself because I knew that I'd otherwise look back and think, wait a minute, what if I had just told the story I wanted them to know all along? So this is really my most important piece of advice in approaching the Harvard essay. It's really my advice in approaching every essay, but it is most important in this one. There are no guarantees. Most of you will not get in. That's a fact. So you might as well do yourself proud in the essay. Write it in such a way that you can look back on the choices that you made on this journey with no regrets. Because you told the story that you wanted to tell. You authentically answered the question. You told Harvard what it was that you really wanted them to know about you. So, choice equals voice. You're making choices even as you go through this process. I really recommend that you make strong choices in your essays, and especially when you're applying to Harvard. So, being yourself is the most important job you'll ever have, and telling your authentic story is part of that job. So, for those of you who have not already considered working with us, we're a tiny team. We're almost fully booked. We have only a few spots left. So if you think that what we do will add to your life, please talk to us. Here's the link, careerprotocol.com/MBA. You can set up a free conversation. We'll talk through your profile. We'll let you know how to work with us. If you think that will add to what you're doing.